Alright, I started working on the oil pan here, and you can see I got it cleaned up pretty decent. This was the braze repair I had spoke of before on the bottom. It doesn't appear that it was leaking. I'm not really sure what would have caused it. It's actually a crack. I'll show that when I flip it over. I don't know if something on the inside wanted to come out, like there was an engine issue or possibly ice in the pan and it froze. I don't know. It's kind of a crack. Also, it's kind of hard to show with the reflection here, but I got this hole welded shut. I just used a piece of copper on the back and was able to weld it. I think it's sealed up pretty good. I'm also going to put some JB weld on the inside as well. Alright, so there's the inside of the pan where that hole was. And on the bottom you can see where someone had brazed this before. And to me it almost looks like a crack. You can see that there. I'm going to smear JB weld on that as well as the pan there where I repaired it. I don't think either was leaking before, but it's kind of one of those like while you're there deals. You should probably do it. But otherwise it cleaned up pretty good. I did have to fix the side of the pan there a little bit. I don't know what happened. It was a little damaged. So I think that turned out pretty good. The oil pan has been painted and I'm putting my new gasket on now. I like to put this Permatex high tack on my oil pan gaskets. Stuff's really a pain in the butt to work with, but I find that it seems to seal it up pretty good. It is a pain if you ever have to take it back off, but usually it'll keep you from having any leaks. You can see I did put a little bit of JB weld there just for kind of, extra care to make sure it's not going to leak. So I got the oil pan back on. It's not very easy putting all those bolts in up there, to be honest. And you can see with the steering here, it's a little tricky getting it up in there. So hopefully I don't have to deal with ever taking that back off again. That was a pain in the butt. Here's a shot of the side. You can kind of see how tight it is. And again, I'm not going for show quality paint job here either. This was just to kind of make it look a little nicer while it was off. And while I had the pan off, I also changed the oil filter. If you ever have to change one of these, pretty much all the letter series, most all the Farmalls and the W series had this style filter, whether it was the tall one like this or there was a shorter one. Always double check when you take this filter canister off to make sure that you have the O-ring out. Sometimes you'll think it's out and there'll actually be two in there. I always get like a pick and dig around just to make sure it's out. I also got that drain out. It was seized in there. That way, if you ever want to drain that housing out, it's a lot easier to do so. I did end up finding an adapter for this oil pressure gauge. I just went to the local hardware store and they actually had this one there. It was only $4. So that's a lot cheaper than paying, I think it was like $15 at the online tractor parts guy wanted. So that should solve this problem. So I decided to work on the carburetor next. I completely took it apart. I didn't really have many major issues. The hardest thing I ran into was getting the throttle shaft bushings out. I ended up just threading them, and then you can stick a bolt in there and pound on the bolt, and it kind of pulls them out. You could also kind of make a little puller if you needed to. But the interior of the carburetor really wasn't too bad. There was a lot of kind of flaky rust in the bottom of the bowl there, which I'll have to clean out, but nothing too crazy. And I also did have a little issue getting the Venturi out too. That was kind of stuck in there. But the next step will be to start sticking this in the ultrasonic cleaner and maybe do a little wire wheeling beforehand. And we'll see what it looks like once it comes out. Alright, here's the parts after soaking in the ultrasonic cleaner. This fluid was crystal clear when I started, so obviously it's done something. And I also cleaned out this pickup screen for the bottom of the oil pump and cleaned up some hardware. So I'm gonna clean these guys off and stick them in my carb dip stuff just for kind of extra assurance, and then we should be good to put it back together. So I'm putting this carburetor back together now, and I think I found part of my problem with it running rich. If you see this float, it's kind of leaned down pretty hard. That should almost be level. So I think that's part of my problem as far as it running too rich. So I'm going to adjust that and see how it looks. Alright, I got this adjusted now. It's supposed to be at 1 5/16 from that flange to the top of the float. And it was basically 1 1/8 inches, so that would probably cause a lot of my problem. Here's the carburetor all back together. I have it pretty much done, and I'm going to leave it kind of this raw finish. I'm going to put a little bit of clear coat over it. I think it looks nicer than having it painted. Usually you paint it, you'll get a leak after a while, and then it'll end up messing the paint up anyhow. So it's all finished. I did choose to use the old bolts though. I like the old dot top bolts personally. And it does pay to keep all this old stuff. I actually, when I was installing this choke shaft seal retainer thing here, I kind of screwed it up. So luckily, I always save like all this old stuff and unused parts, and I actually had a spare one in my extra parts. So I'm going to put all this stuff in the bag and keep it for next time. You never know when you might need something out of there. So next we'll put this back on the tractor and go from there. Okay, the carburetor is back on the tractor now. I did replace this piece of hose as well. The last one was a little dry rod and looked kind of ugly, so I happened to have a new piece, so I figured I'd just throw it on. I also did get the manifold painted. I just used a high temperature silver paint for that. I do have to make a new fuel line yet. I don't really like this rubber fuel line, so I'm gonna probably make one out of brake line or something like that. I think that'll look a little nicer. So I think this looks pretty good. Next step will be to make the fuel line.